Tak, tak, aku secure.
Situ ada orang.
Aku tengah usah orang.
2 squads.
SMG up for grabs.
Taking direct fire.
Movement!
Pecah, dah pecah. Serius dah pecah.
Movement! Cancel that. Repositioning.
Dah 2 pecah.
Taking fire.
What the fuck?
Movement.
Gas is moving.
Fire.
You're in the gulag now. Fight to earn redeployment. Time for a fight. You're up next. Get ready. You win this fight and you return to the front line. But if you lose, you're done. Beat them down.
You're not dead yet.
Oh, depan kau.
Broke them. Well done. Stand by.
Wow.
Dude.
Your teammate has failed. They're returning to base.
Gila bye. Dia
All right, guys, here we go. 6900 XT from AMD, kind of like the last graphics card we've kind of been waiting on for this entire launch season, at least for the end of this year. We're gonna talk today about whether or not it even holds a candle to the RTX 3090, which is what it's kind of been touted as being the 3090 killer by some other people out there. And we're gonna see whether or not that holds true today. So, hang on to your butts. This is gonna be one of those wild rides. This is the top dog offering from AMD. It's re-entry into the extreme, there's a bent fin, it's really bugging me. Oh, sorry, distracted easily. This is their re-entry into the high-end graphics market, something we haven't seen them attempt since back when Vega and Radeon 7 was kind of sort of a thing, but never really competitive. This was touted to be an RTX 3090-esque card, and I can tell you right now that for the most part, it looks exactly like a 6800 XT. The cooler is identical, the dimensions are identical, but it's a $999 MSRP, and obviously, we're gonna talk about pricing. And the hypothetical that MSRP is exactly what you could go and buy it for. The volatile pricing and scalping and all that stuff going on, we're gonna hope all the pricing comes back to normal, but we have to go by the pricing that is actually announced by the manufacturer. That's the way that it works. So whether or not you get it for that price is obviously gonna be different. There are custom board partner cards that will be coming out, obviously. All your favorite brands like Sapphire and XFX and Power Color and all of them that are the usual suspects when it comes to making custom AMD cards will be making custom 6900 XTs also. But if the 6800 and 6800 XT launch taught us anything, is that it seems like there is even less allocation of AMD cards available for launch than there was for NVIDIA. So finding the AMD cards is proving to be much tougher than even NVIDIA. So we're gonna hope that things do normalize. But I've even mentioning all this, yes, to get the obvious out of the way, that this is a really crappy time for graphics card launches for anyone trying to keep up with demand, and getting it for the prices that they're advertised for, or at least MSRP, is very, very difficult. So we're obviously operating on the hypothetical that you could walk into your big box retailer or go to your favorite e-tailer site and buy one for the price that they're supposed to be. Moving forward, it's essentially a 6800 XT with obviously more processors or more stream processors and a higher power limit. 300 watt is what's advertised. But I'm gonna go ahead and kind of go right into the whole too long didn't watch. Spoiler alert, this card was actually fairly disappointing to me this time around for several reasons. To understand those reasons, go and show you the charts so that you guys can see how it compared to the titles that we use. One thing I want you to notice here is I completely omitted Valhalla, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which is a new title that we started using because of extreme inconsistencies, not only with our AMD cards, but our NVIDIA cards as well. There's something just obviously wrong and broken with that card. It is an Ubisoft title, so that's to be expected. But anyway, let's go and look at the charts and let's talk about it. So this is advertised as a 300 watt part. And what AMD was kind of doing is they were kind of touting that they've got as much power as a 3090 or up to a 3090 with rage mode and the smart access memory turned on, which, as you guys may notice with our charts, we are using an Intel CPU and not any sort of smart access memory turned on. Because one of the reasons why we don't use that is, one, rage mode is something you have to activate. And we test our cards out of the box, which means they come out of the box, they go onto the system, they play games. That's how we do it. That's how most people operate their graphics cards, especially this time around with more people buying graphics cards and new systems for the first time. They may not be very versed in going in there and tweaking these settings to get more performance out of their card, like rage mode or enabling smart access memory, because of the fact that there's so many people out here that are doing this for the first time. And that's why I recently put out a video showing the basics of understanding your graphics card so that people could actually have a little bit of baseline knowledge on what some of these specs mean, what some of the settings mean, and what they're seeing on screen, and what that means when they start looking at the stuff in programs like GPU-Z and MSI Afterburner and such. First things first, you might have noticed those charts were quite the FPS roller coaster. Just complete swings from one end of the spectrum to the other. Just completely bottlenecked. By the way, 1080p, we just took it off the chart entirely because it is just bottleneck city. Obviously, for both the 3090 and this card, it is just bottleneck city. I can tell you right now, it was some 1080p numbers were lower than 1440p because the bottleneck was so hard. And because the GPU was spending probably more time swinging its core clock speed because of how hard it was being CPU bound, that we actually got less performance in 1080p than 1440 in many instances. So this card obviously being a 144 hertz 1440p card or a 60 plus FPS 4K card obviously is where this thing is sort of belongs. Those swings were just like, it caused me to investigate and go, what is going on here? Now it's important to note, the drivers that we test with, these are pre-release drivers. They are not the same driver number that you'll see when you go and update your Radeon software to get the latest drivers for your newest graphics cards. These are, I don't want to say band-aided drivers, but they really feel like it in many of these instances where they work, but man, we never know if we're giving you the full customer experience because they'll come out with another driver on launch day that is supposed to be a more official, like polished driver. So because of these massive FPS swings and some titles, we didn't even put it on the chart because we're only comparing this to the 6800 XT, the 3080 and the 3090, this card was being beaten by the 3070 in some titles. And that's because of not only driver optimizations and titles that are obviously a little bit more leaning towards NVIDIA and the NVIDIA technologies, and then the AMD titles, it's obvious that this card wins with AMD titles that have AMD logos on them because, you know, subroutines and all that sort of stuff. Maybe one day we'll do a video about when people talk about intentional bottlenecking with one brand versus another. That's all about subroutine and the way it does its instructions based on the card that's identified. Something we can talk about later. But then I decided to investigate what is going on. Phil and I were like, did something happen with our CPU and our memory? Did that get reset? Because we do run an overclock on our 10900K to try and alleviate as much of the bottlenecks as possible. That all checked out. Nothing was wrong. We had the right driver installed. But then when we went into Radeon software, by default, out of the box, it's set to the profile it's supposed to be, which is profile default. That just means out of the box settings. But we noticed under load, it was only limiting, or it was only allowing 250 watt power draw. And I looked at Phil and I went, 250 watts? Okay, interesting. So what happens if I increase the power consumption or increase the power limit? If you're wondering what I'm talking about, you should go watch our video a few videos ago where we explain what all these settings mean. So this card has a boost limit of 2250 out of the box. Now it was sitting in the 2300s and as high as the low 2400s, just like the 6800 XT. It's obvious that AMD's got a very high clocking core in here. However, its IPC is obviously lower than that of NVIDIA's because of the fact that if it was on par with it, the higher clock speeds would get you more performance than we're actually seeing out of this. So high clock speed's good, but we just need to get more, oomph out of each cycle. But we noticed 250 watt was where it was stopping. So I went ahead and maxed the power limit, which is an additional 15%, just like we saw with the 6800 XT. And the power limit immediately started showing 300 watts, which allowed our core clock to come up to nearly 2500 megahertz and lock there. Well, as we find out, this is a 300 watt card. And out of the box, it was power limiting to 250, which as such was also limiting the core clocks. But that doesn't necessarily hold up either because if it's a 2250 megahertz card, we were above that anyway, in the high 2300s, low 2400s, which tells us that the boost algorithm based into the card of the turbo clocks was happening. So I can't really explain the weirdness that we were seeing. The core clocks were higher than they should have been for the standard boost tables. However, the power limit was 50 watts below where it should have been. And an extra 50 watts can level out the core clocks, which would keep some of these crazy swings that we were seeing happen. Now, one other thing that we observed is that we were getting pretty close to, and in some titles exceeding 100C on the junction temperature, which is the hottest part of the die, and then over 80C on the edge temperature. That's significantly warmer than we were seeing on the 6800 XT. Yeah, but Jay, there's more cores in there, so that makes sense. But that was at the 250 watt. As soon as I increased the power limit to where it should be the 300 watt, as it should have been out of the box, then we saw the temperature start to climb even higher, as high as 110C. Again, people would say that's normal. So there's kind of a trifecta happening here. One, the card is not being allowed 300 watts like it's supposed to, at least not with this driver out of the box with whatever BIOS is preloaded on this card. Second, the temperature was high enough